The mining colony had once been full of life. Ships used to land every few days bringing supplies, laughter, and news from Earth. The settlers had built homes out of the red dust, raised children under the twin suns, and believed they were helping humanity's future by being here, on the edge of known space. They called it the Frontier Star, a place where new beginnings were forged from hard work and courage. But that was years ago. Now silence ruled the world. The landing pads were empty. The power lights dim and the sound of the wind had become their only companion. The outpost had been cut off after a massive storm damaged its main communication tower. Repairs were slow. Supplies grew thin. The colonists had sent distress calls again and again, hoping that someone, somewhere, would hear. Months passed and there was still no answer. At first, people kept faith. They told themselves that Earth was just far away, that help would arrive soon, that maybe the signal just needed time to travel across the stars. But as weeks turned into months, belief began to die. One by one, the settlers stopped waiting by the old comm station. Some said the Federation must have forgotten them. Others whispered darker things, that maybe the government had decided it wasn't worth saving a handful of miners on a dying world. The planet's storms made life harder each day. Dust clouds tore through the colony, coating every wall and vent. The solar panels no longer gave enough energy, and the backup generators could only power a few buildings at a time. Water filters clogged. Food rations had to be shared carefully. Families learned to sleep through hunger. The small medical unit ran out of proper medicine long ago, forcing people to make do with old supplies and improvised treatments. In the evenings, when the winds calmed, people gathered around heaters made from salvage machine parts. They talked quietly, trying to remember the old days. The smell of new ships, the sound of laughter in the hangars. Some tried to keep morale up, telling stories about Earth, the blue planet most of them hadn't seen in years. But even those stories began to fade as survival took over. The colony's leader tried to keep order, though he had lost his own family to sickness months earlier. He spoke with tired eyes, promising that if they just held on a little longer, rescue would come. But few believed it anymore. What was there left to hold on to when every system was breaking down and the sky showed nothing but endless emptiness? Still, one man refused to give up. He wasn't a soldier or a hero, just an engineer who had helped build the communication array when the colony was new. Every day, while others scavenged or repaired water lines, he climbed the cracked tower on the edge of the settlement. He worked alone, using scraps of metal and old wiring, trying to bring the transmitter back online. The winds cut into his face, the static burned his hands, but he didn't stop. It wasn't hope that drove him anymore, it was duty. Someone had to keep calling even if no one was listening. Late one night, he sat in the control room, surrounded by flickering lights and failing screens. The air smelled of dust and burnt circuits. He pressed the transmitter switch again, and his voice, rough from exhaustion, filled the silent air. "If anyone can hear us," he said, "we're still here. We're alive, please, don't forget us." The message echoed into space, weak and broken, vanishing into the endless dark. No reply came. There never was. But he still sent it again the next night and the next, whispering into the stars because it was all he could do. Outside, life continued to fall apart. The outer sectors of the colony were abandoned as oxygen levels dropped. Families moved into the central dome where power was still stable. They used the old mining tunnels for shelter when storms came. The children, once curious about the universe, now played with stones and broken metal parts, pretending they were spaceships. Their laughter had changed, smaller, quieter. Every few days, a group of scavengers left the colony in search of resources. Sometimes they found crashed ships from old supply runs stripped bare by raiders. Sometimes they never came back. People began to disappear, taken by the harsh environment or by the bands of scavenger pirates that prowled the edges of the system. The colonists learned to live with fear. They learned to keep their lights dim at night so no one would notice them from orbit. The stars above were both beautiful and cruel. They reminded everyone of home, but also of how far away it was. On clear nights, some settlers climbed to the surface to look at the horizon. The twin suns had begun to fade earlier than before, a sign the planet's star was dying faster than scientists had predicted. It gave the land a strange red glow, like the whole world was bleeding out its last light. There were moments when the people tried to find hope again. They would gather together, share what food they had, sing old songs, or read from stored recordings of Earth broadcasts. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. But the illusion always broke when the wind returned, rattling through the metal walls, whispering that the end was coming. Some of the older settlers began talking about leaving, building one last ship and trying to reach another world. But the younger ones knew it was impossible. The only ship that still worked was a mining transport barely capable of suborbital flight. Without help, they were stranded. Completely alone, time became meaningless. Days blended into nights marked only by power failures and desperate repairs. The engineer still sent his signal each evening. People called him stubborn, even foolish, but they also began to depend on him. His quiet ritual gave them a strange sense of comfort. As long as he kept sending that message, there was still a thread of connection to the rest of humanity, no matter how thin. Then came the worst storm in decades. It tore across the surface, ripping apart buildings, toppling antennas and flooding the lower tunnels. The colony lost nearly everything that day: food reserves, machinery, even parts of the power grid. When it finally ended, the survivors stepped out into a wasteland. The engineer's tower had collapsed. The last working transmitter was buried beneath tons of metal and sand. That night, the colony was silent. Truly silent. The people sat together in the main dome, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the backup generator. For the first time, the engineer didn't climb the tower. He sat among them, staring at the floor, his hands shaking. He had nothing left to fix. No signal left to send, and yet even in that silence, something strange happened. A child, barely old enough to remember Earth, asked him, "Did they ever hear us?" The man looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Maybe, maybe not yet." That night he went outside alone. The sky above shimmered faintly through the thin atmosphere. He could see the distant stars twinkling, unreachable but alive. He took a small handheld beacon from his pocket, an old emergency transmitter he had been saving for years. Its battery was almost gone, but it still worked. He pointed it toward the heavens and pressed the signal button. A single pulse of light flashed upward, vanishing into the dark. He whispered, "If you can hear us, we're still here." Then he turned back toward the dying colony, where the last few lights of humanity flickered in the endless red dust. He didn't know that somewhere far across the galaxy, that faint signal had just brushed against a Terran listening post, a forgotten relay orbiting a quiet moon. But for now, he could only return to his people, holding on to one fragile belief, that even in the loneliest corner of the universe, someone might still be listening. And so, as the cold wind blew across the empty plains, the colony endured another night. Weary hearts beat on. The humans of the frontier star refused to surrender completely to the dark. They were tired, hungry, and afraid, but deep down a spark remained. A small, stubborn spark that whispered, "Humanity doesn't forget its own." No one there could have known that this single pulse of light, barely strong enough to cross the void, would soon awaken something far greater. For now, the colony slept beneath a dying sun, unaware that across the stars the silence had finally been broken. Of course, here's part 2 expanded to around 1,500 words, written in simple, natural English, with an emotional and cinematic tone that feels human and engaging throughout. It continues seamlessly from part 1 and remains fully YouTube safe. The storm had passed, but its scars were everywhere. The colony looked like a battlefield. Roofs were torn open, metal walls bent like paper, and the air smelled of burnt circuits. What little food they had stored was now spoiled, and half the solar panels were buried under thick layers of red dust. People moved slowly through the ruins, their eyes heavy and distant. They had survived another disaster, but survival was no longer a victory. It was just another day of waiting for the end. Inside the main dome, a few heaters buzzed weakly, casting faint light across the tired faces. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't leave. The children huddled close to their parents, too weak to play, too frightened to ask questions. Every sound, a creak, a gust, a falling piece of debris, made them flinch. The colony leader stood near the broken control console, trying to sound strong. He spoke of rebuilding, of rationing, of keeping faith, but everyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Even he didn't know how much longer they could go on. The air filters were failing again, and without new parts, soon they would start breathing dust. Some wanted to leave, to take the old mining shuttle and try their luck beyond the atmosphere. Others said it was madness. The ship could barely fly, and even if it worked, there was nowhere nearby that could sustain them. The argument went on for hours, voices rising and falling until the leader finally raised his hand. "No one leaves," he said quietly. "If we die together. But if help comes, we'll still be here." Those words hung in the air like smoke. Help. It was a word that had lost its meaning long ago. No ship had come, no message had been received. Still, the people nodded because they needed something to hold on to, even if it was only a lie. The engineer sat near the edge of the dome, staring at his hands. They were rough and burned from years of work. The tower he had built was gone now, shattered by the storm. But something inside him refused to stop. He kept thinking about that last small beacon he had sent, that single flash of light disappearing into the stars. Maybe it had reached someone. Maybe somewhere a human outpost had seen it. That thought, faint as it was, kept him alive. Over the next few days, the colonists worked to rebuild what they could. They dug through the wreckage for salvageable materials. The engineer helped fix the oxygen pumps using old mining tools. Others collected solar panels and cleared pathways between shelters. It was slow work, but it gave them purpose. Every repaired wire, every working light, it felt like defying fate. Food remained their biggest problem. The hydroponic farm had been destroyed, and the remaining nutrient packs would last only a few weeks. People began skipping meals so the children could eat. Still, no one complained. There was a quiet strength among them, a shared understanding that they only had each other now. At night, the engineer returned to the collapsed tower. He spent hours digging through metal and dust until he found the remains of the old transmitter. The power cell was damaged, but the core components were intact. It wasn't much, but it was something. Using a small torch and steady hands, he began to rebuild it piece by piece, soldering wires under the faint light of the dying sun. While he worked, he remembered the first time he saw the stars from this planet, how bright they were, how endless the universe had felt. Back then, it had been a symbol of opportunity. Now it felt like a cold reminder of how small they were. Still, he kept building, whispering to himself that if the signal had reached anyone, maybe they were already on their way. Days passed, then weeks. The nights grew colder. The twin suns set earlier each day, and the sky burned a deeper red. The planet's dying star seemed to fade faster now, and the light that once gave life now looked like the glow of an ending fire. Then came the raiders. They arrived without warning, a small group of scavenger ships, drawn by the colony's faint power readings. The colonists had seen them before, distant shadows in the sky, but this time they came closer. The alarms barely worked, but someone shouted when they saw the glint of metal above the horizon. Panic spread instantly. People ran for cover, dragging children and supplies into the tunnels below the dome. The raiders didn't land this time. They just hovered in orbit, scanning the surface. Everyone knew what that meant. They were mapping the area, preparing for another strike. The colonists hid in silence, praying the ships would move on. After what felt like hours, the shadows finally disappeared. But no one felt safe anymore. They knew the raiders would return, and next time they wouldn't just hover. That night, fear hung heavy over the colony. The engineer sat by the broken transmitter, staring up at the stars again. The thought of dying out here, forgotten and unprotected, clawed at his chest. He wished he could send another signal, shout into the void one more time. But the transmitter wasn't ready yet. Then he noticed something strange. A small light blinking faintly on the receiver panel. It was weak, almost invisible, but it was blinking in a steady rhythm. He leaned closer, his heart pounding. Could it be interference? Or was it a reply? He adjusted the dials, cleaned the contacts, and listened. At first there was only static. Then through the crackling noise came a faint tone, a repeating pattern. It wasn't a voice, but it was human-made. No natural source could produce such precision. His breath caught in his throat. Someone, somewhere, had picked up the signal. He ran to the main dome, shouting for the others. People gathered around the old console, eyes wide with disbelief. They listened to the faint pattern echoing from the receiver, the sound of hope returning after years of silence. It wasn't much, but it was enough to change everything. The leader looked at the engineer, barely able to speak. "What does it mean?" he asked quietly. The engineer smiled for the first time in a long time. "It means," he said, "we're not alone." The next few days were filled with nervous energy. The colony came alive again. People repaired lights, cleared the landing zone, and fixed what little equipment they had left. They didn't know when help would come, but the idea that someone was out there, someone human, gave them strength. Even the children smiled again, running around the dusty corridors pretending to be rescue pilots. The engineer kept working on the transmitter, strengthening the signal. He managed to get the power cell stable enough to send a stronger burst. This time he added coordinates and a clear distress code. His hands trembled as he pressed the switch, watching the signal light up the console. "Please," he whispered, "find us." After sending the message, all they could do was wait. Hours passed, then days. The signal pattern on the receiver stopped blinking. Some began to fear that the response had been a mistake, just static or an old automated relay. But deep inside, most of them refused to give up again. Something felt different this time. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the pause before something arrived. Outside, the wind howled across the barren land, carrying red dust over the metal domes. The colony still looked broken, still fragile, but within its walls, the people were alive again. They had work to do, repairs to finish, hopes to protect. For the first time in years, the air wasn't heavy with despair. No one could sleep that night. The sky above shimmered faintly, and though the stars looked the same as always, they now seemed closer somehow, as if the universe itself had turned its eyes toward them. The engineer stood outside the dome, hands in his pockets, staring at the horizon. He didn't know when help would come. He didn't even know if it would come at all. But for the first time, he believed it could, and somewhere far away across countless light years in the silent corridors of a Terran patrol ship, a faint distress code began to blink on a forgotten console. It was weak, old, and nearly lost to cosmic noise, but it was human. The crew on watch stared at it in disbelief. A colony signal that was supposed to be extinct had just spoken again. The stars, once indifferent, had finally listened. Deep in the black ocean of space, far beyond the reach of most human eyes, a faint light blinked on a forgotten console. It was almost mist, a small flicker of data buried in endless static. But a young communications officer on duty noticed it. At first he thought it was an error. The signal was so old, so weak that it barely registered. Still, something about it caught his attention. It carried a human signature, a code that hadn't been used in decades. He leaned closer to the screen, frowning as the pattern repeated. It wasn't noise. It was a distress call. Across the control deck, the hum of the ship continued. A Terran patrol cruiser moving through deep space on a routine scan. Most of the crew were half asleep, bored after months without incident. But the moment the officer raised his voice and said he had detected a human emergency signal, the air changed. The commander walked over, his boots echoing against the metal floor, and looked at the display. "Source?" he asked. The officer ran a quick analysis. The results appeared on the screen. A set of coordinates from a sector long abandoned by human settlers. The commander frowned. The Federation had declared that system uninhabitable years ago, after it lost contact with a mining colony. No one had expected survivors. But the signal was real, faint though it was. It carried the unmistakable rhythm of a human-made distress code. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room filled only with the soft hum of machinery and the blinking light on the console. Then the commander said quietly, "Patch it through." The speakers crackled. A voice, faint and broken, filled the room. Most of the message was lost in static, but a few words broke through. "Colony. Alive. Need help." The signal faded, then repeated, as if whispering from the edge of time itself. The commander stared at the screen. "How long has this been going on?" "Unknown, sir," the officer replied. The signal seems to have been looping. Based on decay patterns, it's been traveling for months, maybe years. Years. That meant someone had been trying to reach out all this time, and no one had heard them until now. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. There were strict orders about leaving patrol zones. But there were also unspoken laws among humans, laws older than the Federation itself. One of them was simple: you don't ignore a human distress call. The commander stood in silence for a moment. Then he gave a quiet order. "Set a course for those coordinates." The navigation officer hesitated. "Sir, that would take us far outside the authorized patrol grid." "Command will—" "I know what command will say," the commander interrupted. "But we can't pretend we didn't hear that signal. If they're still alive, we owe them more than silence." The bridge went still. Then one by one the officers nodded. The ship's engines came to life with a deep, steady roar. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched into lines of light as the cruiser jumped into faster-than-light travel. The human ship was on its way. Back on the dying colony, the engineer sat by his rebuilt transmitter, staring at the stars as he had done every night for years. He didn't know it yet, but the faint message he had sent in that single burst of hope had finally been heard. Still, he continued his routine, checking wires, adjusting frequencies, whispering into the empty air. "If anyone can hear us, please hurry." Days passed on the colony with no visible change. The people carried on as before, repairing what little they could, sharing food, comforting one another. The fear of another raider attack lingered. The nights were cold, the wind cruel, but there was something different now, an invisible shift in the way people moved and spoke. Hope, fragile and uncertain, had returned. They didn't talk about it openly, but everyone felt it. The engineer could see it in their eyes when he walked through the camp. The children laughed a little louder. The workers pushed a little harder. Even the leader, who had looked so defeated, began to speak again of rebuilding the farms once the storms calmed. Still, there was no sign of ships in the sky. The engineer tried not to let doubt creep in. Maybe the signal had reached someone. Maybe not. But something deep in his chest told him that someone, somewhere, was listening. Meanwhile, the Terran cruiser raced across the void. The crew monitored the signal as they traveled, refining its source. The readings grew stronger the closer they got. What had once been a whisper was now a faint voice calling out from the dark. It was enough to confirm what no one wanted to say aloud. There were indeed survivors. The journey took several days. Each one felt longer than the last. The crew couldn't stop thinking about the people waiting on that forgotten world. How long they must have suffered. How many had already been lost. The commander spent most of his time in the observation deck, watching the stars pass by, lost in thought. Humanity had spread across hundreds of systems, but sometimes it forgot the cost of its own reach. How many other colonies had been lost like this, silent and unseen? When the cruiser finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the view before them was breathtaking and tragic. The planet lay beneath a dying star, its surface painted in red and gold. Scans showed massive storms, unstable weather, and collapsing infrastructure. Radiation levels were rising near the equator. But buried beneath the chaos was something unmistakable, a faint human energy signature. "There they are," the commander said. Quietly, the ship's sensors confirmed it, a cluster of structures still producing minimal power. The distress signal was coming from there. It wasn't automated. Someone was maintaining it by hand. The crew stared at the readings, realizing what that meant. After all these years, someone down there had never stopped trying. The commander gave his order immediately. "Prepare the dropships. We're going down." On the colony, the sky was quiet as always. The wind whispered over the domes. People were inside, resting, eating what little they had left. Then one of the children pointed upward. Something bright was moving across the horizon. Small at first, like a star in motion. Then it split into several streaks of light, growing larger, brighter. The colonists rushed outside, shielding their eyes. The engineer's heart pounded in his chest. It couldn't be real. It had to be another dream. But as the streak slowed, the roar of engines filled the sky. For the first time in years, the heavens above the colony were alive. The ships descended slowly, fire trailing behind them as they broke through the atmosphere. Dust storms rose from the ground as they passed. The sound was deafening, a deep thundering noise that shook the ground beneath their feet. People fell to their knees, some crying, some laughing, unable to speak. After so many years of silence, the noise of engines was the sweetest sound they could imagine. The engineer could barely move. His eyes followed the largest ship as it came down over the old landing zone. Its hull gleamed silver under the red sky, marked with the symbol of the Terran Federation. When it finally touched down, the wind swept across the colony, carrying with it a wave of warmth and light. The air shimmered as the engines cooled. A ramp opened slowly and figures stepped out. Humans dressed in armored suits carrying supplies and tools. Their helmets reflected the orange glow of the dying sun. No one spoke at first. Then one of the rescuers lifted his helmet, revealing a tired but unmistakably human face. He looked around at the ruins, at the people staring back in disbelief, and said simply, "We heard you." The crowd erupted. some crying, some cheering, others frozen in shock. The engineer felt his knees give out. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing could prepare him for the reality. They weren't alone anymore. Humanity had come back for them. The rescuers spread through the camp, handing out water and food, checking the injured. The commander stepped down from his ship and looked around, his eyes heavy with emotion. He had seen many worlds, but none like this. A place where humans had been left behind for years, surviving through nothing but willpower and faith. The engineer approached him, hands trembling. "You found us," he whispered. The commander nodded slowly. "No," he said. "You found us. You never stopped calling." Above them, the last light of the dying star flickered across the horizon. But for the first time in years, it wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The quiet that had ruled the colony for so long was gone, replaced by the steady hum of ships and the sound of human voices filling the air again. In that moment under the red sky, the people of the lost colony realized something they had almost forgotten. Humanity may wander far and fall into darkness, but it never abandons its own. And though none of them could see it yet, this rescue was only the start. Across the galaxy, other ships had received the same signal, and humanity was stirring once more, answering a call that had waited too long to be heard. The first few moments after the human ships landed felt unreal. For years, the colony had lived in silence, believing they were forgotten. Now the air was alive with movement, voices shouting orders, engines humming, equipment being unloaded. The smell of fuel and hot metal mixed with the familiar scent of dust. It was as if life itself had returned to the world. The colonists gathered in clusters, staring at the ships as if afraid they would vanish. Many of them cried quietly, too overwhelmed to speak. Others just stood frozen, unable to believe that what they saw was real. The engineer walked slowly toward the nearest ship, his hands trembling. He could see people, real human soldiers and medics, stepping down the ramp carrying crates marked with the Terran insignia. For a second, he forgot how to breathe. A medic approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're safe now," the medic said softly. Those words broke something inside him. Safe. It had been so long since anyone had said that. The commander looked around at the ruined colony. What he saw was not just wreckage. It was proof of strength. These people had survived storms, hunger, and years of isolation. The walls might have been broken, but the humans here were still standing. He saluted them silently, his eyes heavy with respect. Within hours, the rescue team had set up temporary shelters. Power generators were deployed, and bright white lights flickered on for the first time in years. The colonists blinked at the sudden brightness, unaccustomed to anything beyond the dim glow of failing lamps. Food and clean water were distributed. Medical drones scanned for infections, injuries, and malnutrition. The once silent dome now buzzed with energy and sound. Children laughed again, a sound that had almost vanished. They ran around the landing site, chasing each other in pure joy. Adults wept openly, hugging the rescuers, thanking them over and over. The engineer stood near the remains of the old tower, watching everything unfold. For so long, that tower had been the symbol of despair. Now, surrounded by light and life, it felt like a monument to endurance. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the commander gathered everyone near the main dome. He spoke calmly, his voice steady over the wind. "You are not forgotten," he said. "Your signal reached us, and not just us. The entire Federation knows now. You are going home." The crowd broke into applause and tears. Some dropped to their knees, others held one another tightly. For a few minutes, the colony was filled with a sound it hadn't heard in years: hope. But peace in the galaxy was never that simple. Far beyond the colony, hidden in the void, the raiders were watching. They had been tracking the planet for months, waiting for the right time to strike again. When their scanners detected new ships entering orbit, they assumed it was a convoy of traders or smugglers. They didn't expect it to be Terran warships, but by the time they realized, it was too late to retreat. Down on the surface, the rescue crews continued their work. Supplies were being unloaded, and the colonists were being moved to safer shelters. The engineer was helping repair a power line when the first alarm sounded. It was faint at first, a soft ping from a radar unit, then louder, faster. One of the soldiers shouted, "Incoming ships!" The sky changed. What had been calm only moments ago suddenly filled with movement. Distant flashes appeared near the upper atmosphere, the telltale signs of ships dropping from orbit. The commander looked up, his face hardening. He didn't need to ask who they were. He knew. Everyone inside the shelters, he ordered. The soldiers rushed into action, guiding colonists into the domes and tunnels. The children were the first to be moved, carried by medics and volunteers. The commander turned to his communications officer. Get a message to the fleet. Tell them we've got hostiles inbound. The officer nodded, sending the signal instantly. Above the planet, the Terran cruiser that had brought them here shifted into defense mode. Weapons systems powered up, scanning the incoming ships. Down below, the colonists could hear the growing roar in the sky. The engineer looked up, fear twisting in his stomach. The last time raiders had come, they'd had nothing to fight with. But this time, humanity was ready. A bright streak tore across the clouds, and the first shot fired. It hit one of the incoming ships, lighting up the sky in a burst of fire. Then the heavens erupted. Beams of light crisscrossed the darkness as human warships opened fire. The sound reached the ground like rolling thunder. The colonists huddled together, trembling as the battle raged above them. The soldiers stayed near the entrances, weapons ready, guarding the civilians. The commander's voice echoed through the comms. Stay down. Do not go outside. For the engineer, the noise was both terrifying and beautiful. For years, the sky had been empty. Now it was alive with power. He climbed to the edge of the dome, just far enough to see streaks of light moving across the heavens. He could feel the vibrations in his chest, the pulse of human strength echoing through the ground. The raiders were fast, but they were not prepared for a fully armed Terran fleet. One by one, their ships were torn apart by precise strikes. Fire lit up the night sky, painting it in shades of orange and blue. It was chaos, yet controlled chaos. Humanity had not come this far to lose now. On the surface, small debris fell like shooting stars. The colonists watched in awe, their fear slowly giving way to disbelief. After years of being helpless, they were witnessing the might of their own kind. The same humans who had built cities on the stars and carved life from empty worlds. The battle didn't last long. Within an hour, the sky cleared. The last enemy ship exploded silently in orbit, its pieces scattering like ash in the wind. A moment later, a calm voice came through the comms. All clear. The skies are ours. Inside the dome, cheers erupted. People embraced each other, laughing and crying. Some shouted the words they had waited years to say, "We made it." The commander stood at the entrance, watching the horizon glow with distant fire. He lowered his weapon slowly and let out a long breath. "It's over," he said quietly. The engineer stepped beside him, his eyes wide with emotion. "They came back for us," he murmured. "And they fought for us," the commander nodded. "That's what humans do." As dawn rose the next morning, the colony looked different. The scars were still there, broken buildings, cracked metal, and dust everywhere. But something had changed. The air felt lighter. The fear that had hung over them for years was gone. The Terran soldiers helped rebuild the damaged shelters. Drones swept the sky for debris, while engineers worked to restore full power. For the first time in years, the colony had warmth, food, and light. The people moved with purpose again. Children helped carry supplies. Adults volunteered to clean and repair. Even those who were weak from hunger found strength in the sight of the human flag fluttering above the dome. That night, as the twin suns set, the engineer stood near the new communication tower, one that the rescue team had helped him rebuild. It stood tall and steady, gleaming silver in the fading light. He ran his hand over the smooth metal, remembering the broken one that had started it all. He whispered to himself, "We called and they answered." In the distance, the commander and his crew prepared the colonists for evacuation. Some would be taken back to Earth, others to new settlements where they could start over. The engineer looked up at the stars, feeling a strange mix of sadness and pride. This place had nearly destroyed them, but it had also proved what humanity was made of. Before boarding the ship, he took one last walk through the empty streets of the colony. The wind blew softly, carrying with it the echoes of all the days they had survived. He could almost hear the whispers of those who hadn't made it, voices reminding him that they hadn't endured in vain. When he finally stepped onto the ship and looked out from the window, the planet below shimmered faintly under the dying sun. It was no longer just a symbol of pain. It was a story of endurance, courage, and hope. As the engines roared to life and the ship began to rise, he whispered one last time to the world that had tested them beyond measure, "We're going home." And far below, On the quiet surface, the rebuilt tower blinked steadily, its light no longer a cry for help, but a beacon of remembrance, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, humanity does not forget its own. The engines hummed softly as the ship rose above the dusty planet, carrying the rescued colonists away from the world that had nearly destroyed them. Through the wide viewing glass, the engineer watched the surface shrink, until it became nothing more than a pale sphere among the stars. For years, that planet had been their cage, their test, and their home all at once. Now they were finally free. Inside the ship, there was quiet at first. Everyone was too tired to speak. Many sat in silence, staring at the walls, still unsure if what they were living was real. Some held each other's hands tightly, afraid that if they let go, it would all fade away. The commander moved through the cabin, checking on the people. He spoke softly to them, assuring them that they were safe. His uniform was covered in dust and ash, but his voice was calm and steady. To the colonists, he wasn't just a rescuer. He was proof that humanity still cared, still fought for its own, even when hope seemed gone. The engineer sat near the observation deck, lost in thought. The stars outside looked different now. Before, when he used to watch them from the ground, they were cold and distant. But now, from the warmth of the ship, they looked alive, as if they were watching him back. He remembered the years of silence, the countless nights when he'd looked at those same stars and wondered if anyone was out there. Now he knew the answer. Humanity had heard, and they had come like a storm. As the ship approached the fleet stationed in orbit, the colonists began to realize just how vast humanity's reach had become. Massive Terran warships hung in space, their hulls glinting in the light of the nearby sun. Each one looked like a fortress armed and ready, a silent promise that no one would ever be left behind again. The ship docked with a medical carrier, and the colonists were led through wide, bright corridors. Machines hummed softly and medics moved efficiently, scanning each survivor, providing food, water, and clean clothes. Many of the colonists had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with care. The simple kindness of being given warm soup brought some to tears. The engineer wandered to the large observation window of the carrier. From there, he could see the planet below and the ships moving in perfect formation. It was beautiful, almost unreal. The commander joined him quietly, standing beside him without a word. After a long silence, the engineer spoke. "For a long time we thought we were alone," he said. "We thought no one would ever come." The commander nodded slowly. "You held on," he replied. "That's what matters. You endured long enough for us to find you." The engineer turned to him. "How did you even know where to look?" "Our signal barely worked." The commander smiled faintly. "Sometimes a whisper is enough," he said. Someone heard it. Someone cared enough to listen. That night, the colonists were given real beds to sleep in, soft, clean, and warm. It was the first time in years that they had rested without fear. Some of them couldn't sleep at all. They just lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the ship, trying to accept that they were no longer fighting for survival. The next morning, the fleet began its journey toward Earth. The announcement sent waves of emotion through the rescued colonists. Many hadn't seen their home planet in decades. Some had been born on that distant world and had never known what Earth even looked like. But everyone felt something stir inside when the word home was spoken. Days passed aboard the ship, and slowly life returned to normal. The colonists started talking again, sharing their stories. Some laughed for the first time in years. Others sat quietly, listening, their eyes wet but smiling. The engineer spent most of his time helping the crew analyze data from the colony's remains. He wanted to understand how the communication tower had finally reached humanity after all that time. He discovered something unexpected. The signal had bounced across old satellite debris, amplified by a chain of chance reflections. It was a miracle, pure and simple. One evening, as the stars drifted outside the window, the commander gathered everyone in the main hall. There were hundreds of people, colonists, soldiers, medics, and all together, standing in silence as he spoke. "You have shown the world what human strength really means," he began. "Even when the universe turned against you, you didn't surrender. You kept the light burning, no matter how faint. That is what it means to be human." There was no applause at first, just deep, heavy silence. Then someone began clapping, slow and steady. Others joined in, and soon the hall was filled with sound. The commander didn't smile. He only bowed his head slightly. Later that night, the engineer went to the observation deck again. The stars looked endless. He thought about the people who hadn't survived, those who had given everything just to keep the colony alive long enough to be found. Their faces passed through his mind one after another. He felt a strange peace knowing that their struggle hadn't been in vain. When the fleet finally reached Earth's orbit, the colonists gathered near the viewing windows. And when the blue planet came into view, there was an audible gasp across the hall. Oceans glimmered under sunlight, clouds drifted softly, and the curve of the world looked almost unreal. For many, it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. For others, it was the first time they truly understood what home meant. As the ships descended through the atmosphere, the colonists pressed their hands against the glass, watching cities and forests appear below. Humanity had changed, massive floating cities, clean energy fields, orbital elevators, yet it still felt familiar. It still felt like Earth. The engineer stepped off the landing platform and took a deep breath of fresh air. It smelled of rain and life. He closed his eyes for a moment, just feeling it. Behind him, children laughed, running across the field. Adults stared up at the open sky, blinking in disbelief. The commander approached him again, his tone softer now. "How does it feel?" The engineer smiled faintly. "Like waking up," he said, "after a very long dream." In the following days, the colonists were taken to recovery centers, given new homes, and reunited with their families. The engineer spent his time in the capital, helping scientists study the data from the colony. He was quiet most of the time, but there was strength in his eyes now, the quiet strength of someone who had survived the impossible. When word spread across the Terran systems about what had happened, people everywhere began to see the story as more than just a rescue. It became a symbol. Across the galaxy, humans were reminded of something simple but powerful. No matter how far they went, no matter how lost they became, they never abandoned their own. The footage of the rescue, the arrival of the ships, the tears, the battle in the sky, and spread across every colony and city. People watched it in awe, and every time someone saw those battered survivors stepping onto the rescue ships, they felt pride swell in their hearts. In the months that followed, memorials were built to honor those who had been lost. The engineer was invited to speak at the dedication ceremony. He stood before a vast crowd, the same sky shining above him that he had once prayed under from a dying world. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "I thought we were forgotten," he said quietly, "but humanity proved me wrong. We were saved not because of power or machines, but because of something greater, because someone cared, because somewhere someone heard a voice crying for help and refused to turn away." The crowd stood in silence for a long time after he finished, and then, as the wind passed through the memorial gardens, someone began to whisper the old phrase the colonists had used to keep hope alive during their darkest nights. "We are still here." Others joined in, and soon, hundreds of voices repeated it together, a chant that echoed across the open air. "We are still here." The engineer closed his eyes and let the words wash over him. He thought of the broken tower, of the endless nights, of the faces that would never be forgotten. Humanity had come for them, not as saviors but as family. That night he looked up at the stars once again. They no longer looked distant. They looked alive, filled with stories of struggle, courage, and unity. And deep down he knew something with absolute certainty. Humanity would always answer. Because no matter how far they drifted, no matter how dark the void became, they were bound by one truth. When one human called out for help, the rest would come, even if it meant crossing the stars. Months passed since the colonists were brought back from the silent world. Life had slowly started to move forward again, but for many of them it wasn't easy to return to normal. The sounds of crowded streets, the lights, the constant movement. It all felt strange after years of silence and struggle. Yet every morning when they woke up to sunlight and laughter, they knew they were finally free. The engineer often visited the memorial that had been built in honor of those who didn't survive. It stood in the center of a quiet park, surrounded by trees that swayed gently in the wind. The names of the lost colonists were carved into black stone, shining faintly under the sun. He would stand there for hours, saying nothing, just remembering. Sometimes children would play nearby, their laughter mixing with the soft hum of the city. He liked that. It made him feel that their suffering hadn't been for nothing. Life had returned. Hope had returned. Humanity had learned something from their story. One day he received an unexpected message from the Terran Fleet Command. They wanted him to join a new mission, not as a soldier but as a technical advisor. The fleet was preparing to travel to the far edges of known space to search for lost colonies and forgotten outposts. The engineer hesitated for a long time. He had finally found peace on Earth. But when he thought about all the other voices out there, all the people who might be waiting just like they had, he knew what he had to do. Before leaving, he visited the memorial one last time. He placed his hand on the cold stone and whispered, "You kept the light alive for us. Now it's our turn to keep it alive for others." Then he walked away, carrying with him the strength of all those who had endured beside him. When he boarded the new ship, the sight took his breath away. It was larger and more advanced than any vessel he had ever seen. Its hull gleamed silver, lined with energy shields and reinforced panels. On its side, painted in dark blue letters, were the words, "Humanity Answers." He smiled when he saw it. The name felt right. The ship's crew was a mix of scientists, explorers, and engineers, men and women who believed that no human world should ever be left behind again. They greeted him warmly, not as a survivor, but as one of them. The commander of the mission told him, "Your story inspired this fleet. You reminded us what it means to be human." As the ship lifted off, the engineer watched Earth grow smaller in the distance. It glowed beautifully against the darkness, a fragile but powerful symbol of unity. For a moment he thought of all the planets scattered across the stars, all the places where humans had dared to live. Some had thrived, others had vanished, but now the search would begin again. Days turned into weeks as the ship traveled through the void. The crew worked tirelessly, scanning old star maps, listening for faint signals, and cataloging debris from ancient satellites. The engineer often sat in the control room, staring at the monitors, remembering the broken tower that had once sent a cry for help into the same darkness. Late one night, while reviewing old transmissions, a faint signal appeared on the screen. It was weak, distorted, and full of static, but it was there. A heartbeat in the void. The crew grew quiet as the engineer adjusted the frequency, trying to clear the noise. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. It wasn't random. It was human. The room filled with tension. Everyone stared at the glowing lines of code on the screen. It was a distress signal, old but still active. The coordinates pointed to a distant system, far beyond the usual patrol routes. The commander turned to the engineer and said, "It looks like we're not done saving our own yet." The ship changed course immediately. Engines flared, and within hours they were racing across the silent stretches of deep space. The journey took days. Every minute felt heavy with anticipation. No one knew what they would find. Another ruined world, or maybe survivors holding on like the colonists once had. When they finally reached the system, the sight before them was haunting. The planet was covered in ice, its surface cracked and dimly lit by a dying sun. Scanners picked up faint energy readings coming from beneath the surface. There was life, but it was fading fast. The crew prepared to descend. The engineer stood quietly near the viewing glass, watching as the icy world filled the screen. His heart pounded. He knew that somewhere below people might still be waiting just like he once had, watching the sky, hoping someone would come. The landing was rough. The cold winds hit hard, shaking the ship. As the crew stepped out, the ground crunched beneath their boots. The air was thin and freezing. Through the mist, they saw the faint outline of old structures buried in snow. Inside one of the domes, they found what they had been searching for: a group of survivors huddled around a failing generator. Their faces were thin, their eyes hollow. But when they saw the human insignia on the rescuers' suits, everything changed. A spark of life returned to their faces. One of them whispered, barely able to speak, "You came." The engineer knelt beside them, his voice soft. "We always come," he said. Those words carried a weight far beyond the moment. For the survivors, they meant rescue. For the crew, they meant purpose. For the engineer, they meant closure. The rescue took days, but eventually every survivor was brought aboard the ship. Food, warmth, and medicine were given freely. As the ship lifted off, leaving the frozen world behind, the engineer stood once again at the viewing window. He could see the faint light of the planet fading below. The commander came to stand beside him. "Feels familiar, doesn't it?" he said quietly. The engineer nodded. "Yes, and it feels right. We were saved once. Now it's our turn to save others." The commander looked out at the stars and smiled faintly. "That's humanity," he said. We fall, we rise, and we reach out again. Word of the new rescue spread quickly across the Terran colonies. It became another symbol, another reminder that no distance was too far, no silence too deep for humans to find one another. Across worlds, people began to repeat a saying that came from the story of that first colony. When one human calls, the stars will answer. As the ship continued its mission, the engineer sat in his cabin one night, writing in a small journal. It was something he had started after returning to Earth. A record of their journeys, their rescues, their encounters. He wasn't writing for fame or recognition. He wrote so that one day someone else might read it and remember that they were never truly alone in the universe. He paused for a moment and looked out at the endless stars. Somewhere out there, other signals might still be waiting, other voices whispering into the dark, and he knew deep in his heart that as long as humanity existed, someone would always listen. The next morning, the crew gathered on the bridge. A new signal had appeared, distant, faint, but human. The commander smiled and turned to the engineer. "Ready for another?" The engineer nodded slowly, a calm determination in his eyes. "Always," he said. As the ship turned toward the new coordinates, the stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter. The engines roared to life, and once again, humanity moved forward, not to conquer, not to claim, but to reach out, to answer, and to remember. Far behind them, in the quiet of deep space, the light of a single beacon blinked steadily. It was the same kind of beacon the engineer had once built, now shining as a message to anyone who might be lost. You are not forgotten. And so, the cycle continued. The humans who were once rescued had become the rescuers. The silence that had once surrounded them was now filled with voices, voices of hope, courage, and unity. In the end, it wasn't technology or power that defined them. It was something far simpler, the will to care, to reach out, and to never turn away from those in need. Because in the vastness of space, where countless stars burn and fade, one truth remained unbroken. Humanity always answers.